The mountain wind had always been his only companion. High above the valleys, where the air grew thin and sharp, the man lived a life carved from silence and survival. His cabin stood alone among towering pines, weathered by storms and time, much like the man himself. His hands were rough, his shoulders broad, and his eyes carried the stillness of someone who had long stopped expecting anything from the world. But even a man of stone can feel the slow pull of change. The winters had grown harsher in recent years. Game had become scarce, and the land that once provided enough now felt unforgiving. Each passing season whispered the same truth. He could not live like this forever. He needed something more stable, something rooted. Farmland. The idea felt foreign to him at first. He had never tilled soil or traded crops. His life had been built on hunting, chopping wood, and enduring. But farmland meant control. It meant food that didn't depend on luck or the movement of animals. It meant a future. So, for the first time in years, the mountain man left his home. The journey down was long and unfamiliar. With each step away from the mountains, the world began to change. The quiet rustle of leaves was replaced by distant voices. The scent of pine gave way to smoke, livestock, and human life. By the time he reached the edge of the town, he felt like a stranger stepping into another world. The marketplace was chaos to him. People moved in every direction, shouting, bargaining, laughing. Bright fabrics hung from wooden stalls, animals bleated from crowded pens, and merchants called out their offers with practiced charm. The noise pressed against his ears like a storm. He stood still for a moment, taking it all in, his presence drawing curious glances. He didn't belong here, that much was clear. But he hadn't come to belong, he had come to buy land. After asking around in his blunt, few-word manner, he was eventually directed to a trader known for selling farmland on the outskirts of the region. The man was said to deal in packages, bundles of land, animals, and other assets sold together for convenience. The mountain man found him near the edge of the market. The trader was everything he was not. Well-dressed, smooth-talking, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He welcomed the mountain man warmly, though there was something calculating in the way he looked him over. "You're looking for land?" the trader asked, his tone friendly but sharp underneath. The mountain man nodded once. "Fertile, quiet, away from people." The trader chuckled lightly. "Ah, a man who knows what he wants. I might have just the thing for you." He spoke of a plot beyond the town. Rich soil, a small structure already built, even a few animals included. The price he named was surprisingly low. Too low. The mountain man frowned slightly. Years in the wilderness had sharpened his instincts. Deals that sounded too good often were. Yet something about the offer pulled at him. Perhaps it was desperation. Perhaps it was the thought of finally having stability. "Why so cheap?" he asked bluntly. The trader waved a dismissive hand. "I need it gone quickly. No complications, no drawn-out negotiations. You seem like a man who prefers simple deals." Simple. That word lingered in the mountain man's mind. He had lived his whole life by simplicity. Take only what you need, trust actions more than words, and never overthink survival. Still, something felt off. The trader leaned in slightly. "It's a full package. Land, structure, livestock. Everything as is. You take it all, no questions asked." No questions asked. For a moment silence stretched between them. The noise of the market faded into the background as the mountain man considered the offer. He thought of the coming winter. Of long nights with nothing but hunger and cold. Then he made his decision. "I'll take it." The trader's smile widened, too quickly, too eagerly. "Excellent choice," he said, already pulling out papers. "Let's make it official." The mountain man signed without reading much. Contracts were not his world. Words on paper meant little to him compared to spoken agreements and lived truth. He handed over his savings, everything he had brought down from the mountains. As the deal was sealed, The trader's expression shifted, just for a second. A flicker of something unreadable. Satisfaction, perhaps. Or relief. "Come," the trader said. "I'll show you what you've bought." The mountain man followed, unaware that his simple decision had just entangled him in something far more complicated than land. Something he never intended to own. And something that would change his life forever. The path out of the market was quieter, but the mountain man's unease only grew. He followed the trader through narrow streets that twisted away from the busy center of town. The noise faded behind them, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The buildings here were older, their wood darkened by time and neglect. Doors remained shut, windows covered, as if the place itself preferred not to be seen. "This way," the trader said lightly, walking ahead without looking back. The mountain man said nothing. His boots struck the ground with slow, steady weight, his eyes scanning everything. Years in the wilderness had taught him to read silence, and this silence felt wrong. They stopped in front of a small, worn structure near the edge of town. It wasn't farmland. There were no wide fields, no open soil, no sign of livestock grazing nearby. Just a leaning building with a crooked door and a fence that had long since given up its purpose. The mountain man's brow tightened. "This isn't land," he said flatly. The trader turned, still smiling, though now it seemed thinner. "It's part of it. The land is beyond this point. Consider this an addition." Without waiting, he pushed open the door. A foul smell drifted out, damp wood, stale air, and something heavier beneath it. The mountain man hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The room was dim, lit only by a thin beam of light slipping through a cracked window. Dust floated in the air. The place looked abandoned at first glance, until he heard it. A faint sound. Not quite a voice, not quite a breath. He turned his head sharply. In the far corner of the room, half hidden in shadow, something moved. The mountain man stepped closer, each footfall deliberate. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, the shape became clearer, and his chest tightened. It was a girl. She was curled against the wall, her body thin and fragile, her clothes torn and dirt-stained. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to disappear. Bruises marked her skin, dark, uneven, impossible to ignore. Her hair hung loosely over her face, but even through it, her fear was unmistakable. She flinched at the sound of his approach. Not just fear, expectation, as if she already knew what came next. The mountain man stopped a few steps away. For a moment, he said nothing. His mind struggled to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Behind him, the trader spoke casually, as if discussing livestock. "She's part of the deal." The words landed like a strike. The mountain man turned slowly. "What?" The trader shrugged. "Unwanted. No family willing to claim her. No use to anyone here. I figured I'd include her with the property. Saves trouble." "Trouble?" the mountain man repeated, his voice low. "Yes," the trader said, waving a hand dismissively. "People don't like dealing with damaged goods. But you," he glanced at the mountain man's rugged frame, "you don't seem like a man who'd mind." The air in the room grew heavy. The mountain man looked back at the girl. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were wide now, watching him carefully, waiting, not for help, but for judgment, for ownership, for whatever came after. Something deep inside him shifted. "I didn't come to buy a person," he said. The trader's smile didn't fade. "You didn't ask what was included." Silence fell again. The mountain man's jaw tightened. He had lived his life by simple rules, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't a misunderstanding over tools or animals. This was a human being, treated like an object. "Take the land," the trader continued, his tone growing slightly impatient. "Take the house, the animals, and her. Or walk away and lose your money. Those are your choices." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The mountain man glanced at the door. He could leave, walk away, return to the mountains, and forget this ever happened. It would be easier, cleaner. But then he looked at her again. She had lowered her gaze now, as if bracing herself, as if she had already accepted her fate, whatever it might be. That quiet acceptance hit harder than anything else. The mountain man exhaled slowly, his decision forming not from logic, but from something deeper, something unshakable. "Unlock her," he said. The trader raised an eyebrow. "So you're keeping the full package?" The mountain man didn't respond to the tone. "Unlock her." For a moment, the trader studied him, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. He stepped forward, unlocking the chain fixed loosely around her wrist. A detail the mountain man hadn't even noticed at first, but now made his stomach turn. The chain fell away with a soft clink. The girl didn't move. "Congratulations," the trader said lightly. "She's yours now." The mountain man's expression hardened. "No," he said quietly. "She's not." The trader only laughed, turning toward the door. "Call it whatever you like. A deal's a deal." And with that, he stepped outside, leaving the mountain man alone in the dim room, with a purchase he had never intended to make, and a life he could no longer ignore. The girl remained in the corner, still and silent, waiting, not knowing that everything was about to change. For a long moment after the trader left, the room felt suffocatingly still. The mountain man stood where he was, the faint echo of the trader's footsteps fading into nothing. Dust drifted lazily in the beam of light, as if time itself had slowed inside that broken place. But his focus remained fixed on the girl in the corner. She hadn't moved. Even without the chain, her body stayed curled tightly, her arms wrapped around herself, as if the invisible weight of it still held her in place. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. She kept her gaze lowered now, refusing to look at him again, as if eye contact might invite something worse. He had seen fear before, in animals caught in traps, in prey cornered with no escape. But this was different. This wasn't wild instinct. This was learned. Slowly, carefully, the mountain man took a step back instead of forward. The girl flinched anyway. His jaw tightened. "I won't hurt you," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. The words sounded unfamiliar, as if he hadn't spoken them in years. He wasn't even sure she believed him. He wasn't sure he would, in her place. She didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't speak, but her trembling didn't stop. The mountain man exhaled quietly. He understood something then, not in words, but in instinct. Staying here, in this place, would only deepen her fear. This room held too much of whatever had been done to her. "We're leaving," he said. Still no response. He moved toward the door, pushing it open wider to let in more light. Fresh air slipped into the room, pushing back the stale heaviness bit by bit. He stepped outside first, giving her space, then paused. "You can walk," he added, "or I carry you." The words were simple. No command, just a choice. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the girl shifted. Her arms loosened slightly. Her head lifted just enough for her to glance toward the open door. Light touched her face for the first time, revealing how pale she was beneath the dirt and bruises. She hesitated. Then, with trembling effort, she tried to stand. Her legs failed her almost immediately. The mountain man moved without thinking, stepping forward just in time to catch her before she hit the ground. The moment his hands touched her, she froze completely, every muscle locking, as if she had turned to stone. "It's all right," he murmured. She didn't fight him, but she didn't relax either. Carefully, he lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, far too light. It felt like holding something fragile, something that could break if he wasn't careful. Her body remained stiff in his arms, her breath shallow, her gaze fixed somewhere far away. He carried her out of the building. The sunlight outside was bright, almost harsh after the dim interior. She turned her face slightly away, as if unaccustomed to it. The world beyond the walls must have felt just as foreign as he had felt in the marketplace. Without another word, he began walking. They left the town behind quickly. No one stopped them. No one questioned them. If anyone noticed, they chose not to interfere. To them, the deal had been made. What happened next was no longer their concern. But to the mountain man, it had become something else entirely. The journey back to the mountains was long. He carried her most of the way. At times, when the ground was even, he set her down gently and let her try to walk beside him. Each step she took was unsteady, uncertain, but she tried. He didn't rush her. When she stumbled, he caught her. When she grew too weak, he lifted her again without a word. They spoke very little. Once, near a stream, where he stopped to refill his water skin, he offered it to her. She hesitated before taking it, her hands shaking as she drank. It was the first thing she accepted from him. A small step, but it mattered. As the sun began to set, the air grew cooler. The familiar scent of pine returned as they climbed higher into the mountains. With every step, the world grew quieter, emptier, until it was just the two of them again, far from everything else. By the time they reached his cabin, the sky had darkened. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. The space was simple: rough wooden walls, a small fire pit, a bed made of furs. Nothing more than what was needed, but it was clean, safe. He set her down gently near the fire. For a moment, she just sat there, unmoving, her eyes scanning the room cautiously. There were no chains, no shadows hiding anything, no voices shouting, just silence. The mountain man stepped back, giving her space once more. "You stay here," he said. "No one will come." She looked at him then, really looked at him, for the first time. There was still fear in her eyes, but beneath it, something else flickered. Uncertainty, maybe even the smallest hint of hope. He turned away, adding wood to the fire, letting the warmth fill the room. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what had happened. Those answers would come, or they wouldn't. For now, it was enough that she was here, alive, and for the first time in what was likely a long while, safe. The mountains did not speak, but they changed everything. In the days that followed, the cabin became a quiet refuge suspended between snow, stone, and sky. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like a distant breath. Inside, the fire cracked softly, marking time in a way neither of them fully understood anymore. The girl remained mostly silent. She stayed near the edge of the space he gave her, as if afraid that stepping too far inward might break an invisible rule. At first, she barely moved unless necessary. Food was offered, water was placed nearby, blankets were left within reach, but never forced upon her. The mountain man never insisted. He simply left things where she could choose. And slowly, choice became something she began to trust again. On the second morning, she ate a few bites of bread. On the third, she drank water without hesitation. On the fourth, she sat closer to the fire. The mountain man noticed everything, but never commented. He lived as he always had, quietly, deliberately, letting actions speak instead of words. He chopped wood, tended the fire, prepared food, and maintained the cabin with steady rhythm. His presence was constant, but not invasive. To her, it was unfamiliar. No shouting, no commands, no grabbing hands, no expectations hanging in the air like threats. Just stillness. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside, she finally spoke. It wasn't much, just a broken sound, barely forming into words. "Why?" The mountain man paused mid-motion, wood in his hand. He looked at her, waiting. She swallowed, struggling. "Why? Help me." The question hung between them, fragile and heavy at the same time. He set the wood down carefully. For a moment, he didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because no answer felt large enough. Finally he said, "You were left behind." That was all. No explanation. No attempt to make it sound noble. Just truth. She looked down again, as if trying to understand something she had never been allowed to question before. Days turned into a slow rhythm. The mountains outside grew colder, but inside the cabin, something subtle began to shift. She started moving more freely, sitting closer without hesitation, watching him work instead of avoiding his presence. She learned his routines without being told: when he woke, when he returned from gathering wood, when the fire was tended. He, in turn, learned hers: the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the way she hesitated before accepting anything offered, the way her eyes always checked exits first, even in safety. One morning she asked for water instead of waiting. That small act changed everything more than either of them admitted. As her strength returned, so did fragments of memories she hadn't spoken aloud. Pieces slipped out slowly, never fully formed, but enough to paint a picture of what she had endured before arriving here. She didn't tell it all at once. She couldn't. And he didn't push. But he listened when she spoke. Outside, life remained unchanged. The forest did not rush her healing. The river did not demand answers. Time moved differently in the mountains, less like a clock, more like patience itself. One afternoon, she stepped outside the cabin for the first time. The cold air hit her immediately, sharp but clean. She stood at the threshold, unsure, her hands gripping the doorway. The world stretched endlessly around her: snow-dusted trees, distant peaks, and skies so wide it almost felt unreal. The mountain man watched from inside, saying nothing. She took one step forward, then another. Her legs were steadier now, though still cautious. She looked up at the trees, as if seeing them for the first time in her life. The wind moved through them, and for a moment she closed her eyes. Not in fear, but in something quieter: relief. Behind her, the cabin stood solid and warm. Behind that, the past. Ahead of her, nothing defined yet, but no chains either. She turned slightly, looking back at him through the open door. "Do you live here alone?" she asked softly. He nodded. A pause. Then she asked something else, quieter still. "Why didn't you leave me there?" The mountain man looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you were still breathing." The simplicity of it stunned her. Not pity, not ownership, not obligation, just recognition of life. That night she sat closer to the fire than ever before, not at the edge, not in the shadows, but near the center of warmth. And for the first time since everything had begun, she didn't feel like she had to disappear to survive. Winter loosened its grip slowly, but the mountains still carried a cold edge in the wind. Inside the cabin, however, something different had taken root. The silence was no longer heavy. It had become familiar, almost safe. The girl had started to sit near the fire without hesitation, her movements steadier now, her voice no longer a stranger to the room. She still startled at sudden sounds, still carried shadows in her eyes, but she no longer lived entirely inside them. She had begun to exist in the present. The mountain man noticed these changes without naming them. He did not rush her healing, nor did he mark time by progress. He simply continued his work, chopping wood, repairing tools, preparing food, while allowing her to find her own rhythm beside him. But the past, once buried, rarely stays silent forever. It arrived on a cold afternoon when the sky was heavy with gray clouds. The first sign was distant voices carried by the wind, not the natural sounds of the forest, but human noise, sharp, searching, unfamiliar in this place. The girl noticed it before he did. She froze near the fire, her hands tightening around the cup she was holding. Her eyes shifted toward the window, fear returning so quickly it was almost like a reflex. The mountain man paused from where he was splitting wood outside. His head lifted slightly, sensing the change in her posture. Then he heard it too. Footsteps, multiple, approaching. He set the axe down slowly. From between the trees, figures emerged. 3 men dressed in worn town clothing, moving with purpose. Their presence felt wrong against the quiet of the mountains, like a stain spreading across clean snow. The girl stepped back instinctively into the cabin. Her breath grew uneven. "They found me," she whispered. The mountain man entered the cabin without haste. He already knew. The men stopped a short distance away, calling out. "We know she's here," one of them shouted. "She belongs to us. She was part of a transaction." The word "belongs" made something in the air shift. The mountain man stepped outside fully now, placing himself between the cabin and the approaching men. His stance was calm, but unyielding, like stones set into the earth. "She is not yours," he said. The men laughed. "You don't understand," another replied. "She was sold with the property. Paper is signed. She's legally ours." The mountain man's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "A human is not property." One of the men spat into the snow. "Doesn't matter what you think. We're taking her back." Behind him, the girl stood just inside the doorway, trembling. Her instinct told her to run, to hide, to disappear like she always had before. But something was different now. The presence beside her, the man who had never demanded anything from her, held her in place more than fear did. The lead man stepped forward. "She's damaged," he said coldly. "Barely worth anything, but she still has value." That word, value, cut through the air like a blade. The mountain man moved for the first time, not quickly, not violently, just forward. One step that closed the distance between silence and confrontation. "She is not an object," he said again. The men shifted uneasily now, sensing something in his tone that words alone could not explain. He was stating something unmovable. The lead man reached for something at his belt, frustration turning into aggression. But the mountain man spoke one final time. "If you take one more step toward that door, you will not leave this mountain the way you came." The words were quiet, but absolute. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in the men's expressions. This was not the response they had expected from someone living alone in the mountains. Inside the cabin, the girl's hands slowly loosened. She looked at the man standing outside, between her and everything she had escaped. And something inside her shifted. For the first time in her life, someone was not trying to own her, not trying to use her, not trying to trade her, but standing there, simply refusing to let her be taken. The wind moved through the trees again, colder now, and the moment stretched, thin, sharp, and irreversible. Whatever came next would decide everything. The forest felt different after the confrontation, not because the mountains had changed, but because something inside both of them had. The men eventually left, not with victory, not with certainty, but with hesitation that followed them down the mountain path. The exact details of what they saw on that cold afternoon were never spoken aloud again, but none of them returned, and silence settled once more over the cabin. But this silence was no longer the same as before. It was peaceful. Inside, the girl remained near the doorway long after the men were gone. Her body still carried tension, as if expecting them to return at any moment. Her eyes scanned the trees, the snow, the distance, searching for danger that was no longer there. The mountain man stood a few steps behind her, not touching, not interrupting, just present. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I thought," her voice broke slightly. She swallowed and tried again. "I thought I would always belong to someone." The words lingered in the air. He didn't respond immediately. He rarely did when something mattered too much for simple answers. Finally, he said, "You don't belong to anyone." She turned slowly toward him, as if the idea itself was difficult to understand. He continued, his voice steady, "You never did. That was all. No speeches, no promises, No attempts to reshape her past into something easier to carry. Just truth, spoken plainly, like everything else he believed in. For a moment, she didn't move. Then something in her expression softened. Something that had been locked away for so long, it almost looked unfamiliar on her face. Not fear, not survival, but choice. Weeks passed. Spring began to return to the mountains. Snow melted into streams that ran between the rocks, and the forest slowly awakened with color again. The cabin, once a place of survival, began to feel like something more. She started helping without being asked, not out of obligation, but out of belonging. She gathered water from the stream, organized small things inside the cabin, and even began tending the fire when he was away. Her movements grew steadier, her voice more present. She still had scars, some visible, some not, but they no longer defined how she moved through the world. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, she stood outside the cabin, watching the sky turn gold. The mountain man joined her quietly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I don't know who I am supposed to be now." He looked at the horizon. "You don't have to be what happened to you," he said. That was the closest thing he had ever given her to a direction. She nodded slowly, as if absorbing something she had never been allowed to consider before. Days later, they began expanding the land together. Not as owner and possession, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two people building something neither of them had ever truly had before. A life that wasn't dictated by survival alone. The soil he once came to buy was finally worked. Seeds were planted. The land responded, and so did they. There were still quiet moments when she woke from old memories, and still times when he stood too long in silence, lost in his own past. But neither of them ran from those moments anymore. They stayed. One morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, she stood beside him in the field they had cleared together. "You came here to buy farmland," she said softly, almost smiling. He glanced at her. "I did." She looked at the growing field, and instead, he watched the land for a moment before answering. "I think I found something else." She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. And for the first time in both their lives, the future in front of them didn't feel like something to survive, but something to build.